All right, moving on to historical perspective. I don't have much time to go into the historical perspective. That doesn't mean it's not important. It's very important. The SBC 1995 resolution, for example, admitted that racism today is inextricably tied to the past. African Americans can tell you this, and whites like me have a hard time understanding that. But let's take a quick look at the history of racism in our country. Of course, we start with American slavery beginning in the 17th century until the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. And then we had Jim Crow laws, where there was legal state enforced segregation by these Jim Crow laws that greatly disadvantaged African Americans. We can also speak of recent history as the new Jim Crow era from the 1970s to today. Some will say that the past 50 years, though there is not legal discrimination, the past 50 years, there's still systemic racism, primarily in the form of mass incarceration of African Americans and police brutality. Some refer to this as the new Jim Crow. Church history, we see positives and negatives. As positive, we see the power of the gospel demonstrated through John Newton and William Wilberforce, who led the abolition of slavery in England. We also have deep issues with racism in the church, especially in our Southern Baptist Convention. In 1999, the SBC resolution admitted to the SBC racist origins, repented of them, repented of racism, and resolved to repent, seek reconciliation with their African American brothers and sisters, and fight against social, racial injustice. Let's move quickly to strategy formation. From all this, what can we say about planning a church with racial reconciliation in mind? Well, first, I think the lead pastor should have confidence that the gospel is powerful to heal and ultimately eradicate racism. The pastor needs to be aware of worldview when he listens to what society says about racism. He needs to ask this question: what is the diagnosis that this person is making? What is the prognosis? For example, Black Lives Matter put the diagnosis and the prognosis primarily in the hands of the state. And though while the state can play a helpful role in facilitating equality, the state cannot fully eradicate racism, only the gospel can. So the gospel must be central in preaching and in discipling, and the pastor needs to have confidence that the ultimate solution is not the state, but is the gospel to heal racism. Second, and this is huge for, I think, especially white people, white leaders, white people in the church, is that we need to learn our cultural and historical situation better. When we're planting, we plant Bible churches where we get our heads in the Bible and preach, which is most important, but we tend to be weaker, at least I do tend to be weaker at understanding and learning our cultural and historical moment, especially when it involves racism. It is difficult as a white person to understand the experiences and the hardships of African Americans. So when we plant a church, we need to be firmly aware of what the racial issues are in our city. How racially divided are the churches, for example? And we need to put ourselves in the denominational context of the 1995 SBC resolutions, which I'd encourage you to look up. Next, I do think church plants need to pursue a multiracial church. This issue is not going away. Racial tension is already existing in the church that you are planting. And so you need to be aware of this, and you need to intentionally plan to plant a multiracial church. Racial reconciliation needs to start in the church, which means in the discipleship, blacks and whites should be friends on mission together. Whites should learn from their African American brothers and sisters, listen carefully and empathize with the issues that they communicate, the racial injustice that they experience. At the same time, I want to say this humbly, that I think African Americans should communicate the truth in love, not out of anger, frustration, or bitterness. And individual Christians should use their influence and vocation to influence the state where they can. Finally, the homogeneous principle, you need to figure out where this fits in with your strategy for pursuing a multiracial church. It should be included, multi-ethnic church should be included at some point if you're using this principle. Thanks, and I hope this is helpful when you think through these issues.